the grand liberation begins, because it looks like that Ukrainians initiated the next stage of the landing operation across Dnipro river, and even armored vehicles were spotted crossing Dnipro. And without a doubt, to say the least, the Russians are in extremely big, grave danger. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's get straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. So, today there is this Russian Z citizen who was spotted with an extremely interesting haircut. Pretty much there is a Z letter right in the back of his head. My question to this guy is, if you are so patriotic, if you feel like Putin is doing the right thing, what are you doing on the streets of the Russian cities instead of being on the front lines? Well, I guess I kinda know the answer. Because everything this is not directly related to him. He is not exactly on the front lines, maybe all of his relatives and friends are safe, so for him all of this is just some fancy thing that happens over the internet, on television. I mean, it does not affect his life at all, right? So he decided to just be a popular kid and be like, okay, look at me, I am the one supporting Russia. I'm supporting our president Putin. But all the way until that moment when he will be personally conscripted, and then his vision of the whole entire situation will dramatically change. All of them, they can be the supporters however many times they want, until it does not affect their life. But okay, time to get serious as always, and now let me give you just a couple of bad news, unfortunately, for Ukraine. Then we're gonna talk about the situation in the east of the country, where there are never-ending failures by Russians. And then we move to the south, where it looks like that the grand liberation next stage has officially started, because Ukrainians started transporting their armored vehicles on the other side of Kherson region across the Dnipro river. And then finally we'll talk about Russians, who are in grave danger. And so yes, speaking about the bad news, unfortunately, according to the Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front lines, looks like that Russians started using brand new drones, which were delivered to them from North Korea. And the bad thing about these new drones, unlike Iranian Shahed drones, is that the ones from North Korea are almost completely silent. And it is impossible or extremely hard to notice them. But besides that, according to the Ukrainian intelligence at this very moment, the number of Russian long-range missile is approximately 870 units, which, unfortunately, is more or less close to the same number exactly 1 year ago, which only signals one thing: that Russians were able to establish a pretty uninterrupted missile production for their current needs. But Ukrainians do have some sort of response from themselves as well. So this company Cosmolot developed 31 also new drones, which were allegedly already sent to the front lines, and they are called the Punishers. And just like the North Korean ones, they're extremely hard to be detected by the electronic warfare equipment and radars, and also they're also pretty quiet, making them a pretty good counterparts for the North Korean drones. And so yes, now let's talk about the situation quickly in the east of Ukraine, when there are never-ending failures by Russians, and then we'll switch our attention to the south. But guys, if you don't mind, in the meantime, can you please help me really quickly? All you need to do is to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you like this style of daily updating. Thank you so much. You can also follow me on Instagram, the link will be down below. And so yes, first of all, right before we go to the east of Ukraine, allow me to take a very quick stop in Russian city Taganrog, where recently a local airfield was full of loud noises. According to the locals, and reportedly this is exactly the place where Russians transported recently their attack helicopters. So as you can see, there is no protection for them even this far behind the front lines. There is simply nowhere to hide. Next we refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that Russians continued their offensive along Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line, and even reportedly made some kind of gains, not yet confirmed by this map, while the main concentration of Ukrainian counteroffensive was around Bakhmut. And then Ukrainians also reportedly were able to destroy an artillery firing position of Russians located next to Novotarasivka. Besides that, right here, allegedly also along the eastern front lines, is the video of a Ukrainian fighter jets Su-25s attacking the positions of Russians. And you can see the power of these machines. This video is truly mesmerizing. And speaking about fighter jets, Ukrainians were able to destroy and intercept another Russian plane, Su-24M. And the debris, as you can see from this picture, are found even in Solidar. In addition to that, in Donetsk city, Ukrainians were able to successfully destroy a building where Russians were training how to use the drones. Reportedly, there are casualties and even more the ones who are injured. But nevertheless, Russians continue without absolutely any significant progress to attack against Avdiivka. And right here is yet another video of their most recent attack, which has been successfully repelled with absolutely no single progress by Russians. And reportedly, as of right now, since the beginning of Avdiivka offensive by Russians, they already lost more than 7,000 soldiers and more than 250 units of military armored vehicles. All this so far is for nothing. And by the way, guys, if you want to see the full video, uncensored one, of this failed Russian offensive against Avdiivka, in addition to hundreds of extra photos and videos which I never show on YouTube, please go ahead and check my Patreon. The link is down below and there's 1 week of free access. And so yes, now as promised, allow me an extremely quick update from the south as well, where the grand liberation has looks like officially started. And then we'll talk about Russians in grave danger. But first of all, here is the British intelligence report, claiming that this attack of Ukrainians against the Russian ship, which was not even finished yet in Kerch shipbuilding factory, this only means one thing, is that Ukrainians are able to destroy so distant targets behind the front lines, which basically means the Russian Black Sea Navy and other military targets are no longer safe, even on bordering with Ukraine territories. Basically means they need to bring them even further away, maybe next to Azerbaijan, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, anywhere, because yes, Ukrainians can reach them if they're next to Ukraine. For this reason, in case Russians decide to do this, yes, they have a better chance of protecting their military equipment and vehicles, but it will take logistics much longer time to supply Russians with their immediate needs. In addition to that, according to the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, they released us this video, which shows the destruction of a Russian armored vehicle Terminator, which I think it's fair to say is now terminated. And then also a Russian heavy flamethrower called Solntsepek. Yes, both of these attacks were done with simple drones. In addition to that, Ukrainians were also able to destroy an air defense system of Russians located in Vasilievka. And as we get closer to already notorious Krynki, Ukrainians were also able to destroy an assault group of Russians along with their armored military vehicle. And speaking about Krynki, this is where everything gets extremely interesting, because this last day, reportedly Ukrainians even started to transport their armored vehicles on the other side of Kherson region, across Dnipro river, and you can only imagine how complicated it is to deliver a several tons truck across water obstacle, but looks like that Ukrainians were able to successfully do it, the very first step in the next stage of the grand liberation. And according to already Russian side, this was done by Ukrainians with the heavy support by the artillery, so Russians cannot even raise their heads from their trenches. That is why primarily this transportation was successful. And yes, once again, Russians themselves acknowledge that this is happening right now. In addition to heavy artillery attacks, Ukrainians are using way more than usual number of drones, both for collecting the intelligence and for destroying Russian military targets. And at this point, it is reportedly approximately 300 Ukrainian soldiers are located already on the other side of Dnipro, around Krynki settlement. And yes, Exactly, you got me right, 300 only around Krinky. Because if you remember from my previous video, this is not allegedly the only place where Ukrainians cross Dnipro, it is also something similar happens, allegedly, next to Казачьи лагери, Oleshki, potentially even next to Hola Pristan, and also as far to the east as Nova Kakhovka. All of these are just the assumption and yet not confirmed reports by the General Staff of Ukraine. And I mean, just take a look at this picture from the last year, where Ukrainians were doing practices of crossing Dnipro River, approximately in the same locations where the fighting is happening right now. And I mean, just imagine how complicated it will be to build a temporary bridge, start driving armored vehicles with absolutely no protection left or right, with no forest to cover your movements, just literally being in the open field or water, in this case being an extremely easy target for Russians. That is why every single Ukrainian armored military vehicle which will be able to successfully cross Dnipro is considered to be as a huge victory. And obviously, the more armored vehicles start crossing Dnipro River, the easier it will become for the subsequent ones to do exactly the same. So, as of right now, we might see the very first event in the potential next future chain reaction. And obviously, without a doubt, it is, to say the least, Russians are in grave danger, primarily in the south. Also the ones in the east, whose commanders just tell them to literally sacrifice themselves in Avdiivka for pretty much nothing, and just, every single Russian soldier who is on the territory of occupied Ukraine. And this has also been confirmed by an extremely notorious person, Igor Girkin, who is now still in jail for speaking against the Putin's regime, and he was pretty much an extreme radical supporter of Russia. Though he was always against the Ministry of Defense of Russia and in some way the regime of Putin. But long story short, whatever he says is also exactly the same. That those meaningless attacks that Russians are doing right now, this Avdiivka or absolute lack of defenses in the south, it is something, these are the events which will significantly degrade combat capabilities of Russians in the next year, 2024. Which basically means not only defenses of Russians will be affected or severely disrupted, including the logistics, but also simply because of that, Russians will not have enough force to launch their own offensive. In addition to that, Girkin also assumes that the West might see this, temporarily at least, weakness of Russia and increase the military support to Ukraine. And just because the presidential elections in Russia are to happen in the beginning, in the spring of 2024, there is simply no way Putin is announcing another so desperately for him needed mobilization. Because I mean, if he does it, people will be like, wait a second, wasn't it supposed to be a 3-day war? Why did we do a 300,000 people mobilization back in September? Was it not enough? Are we kinda struggling in this war? This is exactly the thoughts that will be going through people's minds, and this is not a good image for Putin if he wants to win in the elections. Of course, I'm not denying the fact that the elections in Russia are kinda tricky. Not all the time they're fair, or pretty much almost never, at least in the modern history of Russia. But definitely there will be some unrest if Putin decides to do a mobilization right now. And so, as you can see, we have a pretty perfect recipe for a disaster, where Russians are not able to attack. They are barely holding their defenses. Ukrainians started crossing Dnipro River, and even their armored military vehicles start to do exactly the same. This might expose some weaknesses in Russian defenses, and if the West decides to act, it will be the best time to do so, which basically means we might see the beginning of something truly great, the grand liberation of the rest of Kherson region. I'm very excited to see when is this going to start and how this is going to happen, and if you don't want to miss any of these updates, also please consider to subscribe to my channel, it only takes one click. Thank you so much patrons for your support, and see you tomorrow.